Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner. So, Ashley, I understand perhaps you had a birthday somewhat recently.
Nope, that's for sure a lie.
Did you do anything fun to celebrate?
Well, I'm not like a big attention person. It's like I don't like getting attention that I can't control. So I never tell any people that it's my birthday, but my coworkers actually did find out on LinkedIn and like did a bunch of stuff. And I was like, this is so not necessary, but so sweet and nice. But anyways, but I did do something fun. We went to the Brewers game on my birthday. Yeah, it was like my first game like at the stadium post-COVID. So
Nice.
It's not post-COVID, but post like, we sit in pods and stuff. It's super, super cool. We tailgated. So it was really fun. Yeah.
Nice.
I couldn't think of a better way to spend my birthday, to be honest.
Are you gonna be like my grandmother and just always have anniversaries of your 29th birthday? As far as I know, my grandmother never passed 29. She just had lots of anniversaries.
I'd go down to like 24 though. Like 24 was a good year.
Really?
Yeah.
Like 24 would be too young for me to want to go back that far. Like I was kind of an idiot at 24.
Yeah, that's what made it fun though. Like you didn't know any better. Like you could be stupid because you didn't know any better. Like now you know better because you're older and wiser. And it's like, shouldn't do that.
Sure.
I learned my lesson too many times.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough, I guess.
Being naive back then.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Well, happy belated birthday then.
Thank you, Marlon.
Anyway, our topic for today, right-sizing your project, which I was thinking a lot about this topic, trying to decide like, is there enough to talk about on a topic on how to right-size something? And I feel like there is. And my approach is that often when you are thinking about a technology solution that you need, you're thinking about either the pain that you're suffering that you want to go away, you want the technology to make the pain go away, or you're thinking about some other outcome or some feature or functionality that you want to get. And so you're thinking about this at a very broad, like high level, and then you get into the details with, your developer, your consultant, whoever's actually going to do the work. And then you kind of like burrow down the rabbit hole into okay, it needs to do this and it needs to do that, it needs to do that. And I feel like often in that process, it gets lost where you're not always still thinking about the outcome that you're trying to achieve and sort of the impact that that's going to have on your business. And so I feel like historically, this turns into like the ROI calculation, right? Like, okay, what's the return on this investment going to look like? And what's the period of time over which we're going to see it? But I think in lots of smaller projects, like that perspective gets lost and you end up spending a lot of time trying to find a solution to a problem that only comes up once every 6 months, instead of spending your time to fix the thing that happens every day and then just calling it good enough and making sure that there's like an exception process.
Don't you love building the exception into the main like scenario, like accommodating every little exception that comes up?
I know.
Yeah, so I will say the latest project I've worked on, we just nipped that in the bud in the beginning. We were like, what we're building will apply to 90%, and then the 10%, because the person who does it now kept asking like, okay, well, what about this? What about this? And we're like, that's why you're here. Great. You have a reason to be hired, because the exceptions require some, manual work sometimes.
Or a human brain, like you might not be able to,
Exactly.
Right.
So it was really
I feel
nice.
like
That was the first time on a project where I've been able to say, it's only going to solve 90% of the problems.
That's excellent. And I feel like that's an important thing to keep in mind, because I know, Liz, you've seen this in the past too, but like back in the day in like Serum 2011, it was like you're writing like pages of JavaScript for like this one thing that might happen. And so if that happens, then you got to make sure to run all these other steps and like automatically require or not require these fields. It's just like, but guys, it just cost you like $15,000 to write all that code. And this happens once a year.
Even though today, like maybe we don't need to write code for it and we can handle it through configuration, like it's still like it's making your deployment more complex unnecessarily. Like if it, yeah, and I love to ask, like, how often does this happen? If they say only 1 or 2 times a year, it's like, then that doesn't need to be baked into the automated or whatever, like the standard processes that we're deploying.
But I think it's not even like how many times a year, right? Because like the 10% of our business, or, you know, that doesn't fit into that model could happen. That's probably 50, 60 times a year. But that's just how much there is. I guess it's all scalable, right? So it just depends on how much there is, and it improves the purpose of why you still need people to work at companies, and everything can't just be robots, because some things still require a human intervention.
Right. I mean, it comes down to like volume and proportion. So, you know, that 10% only still happens 50 or 60 times a year. But if that's in with thousands of transactions over the course of time, like obviously you want to solve the 2,000 before you worry about the 50.
Agreed.
Yep.
But my favorite part of that is when you come to the end of a project and then somebody asks, well, what about this situation? And that's the first time you're bringing it up, first time you've ever heard about it, but you never accounted for it. And whether it's the thing that happens once or twice a year or not, that's always, I would say, but whenever somebody says, what about this situation? That's kind of the, like, can you just, in my world, no question ever answers like, yes, you can just do something. If you're wondering about a certain situation, most likely you don't need to solve for it with automation.
I love when that happens and you're like, yeah, the current design accommodates that. That's not an issue. Because it's like they're trying to throw an exception curveball out there, and it's like, no, it's fine. That'll work too.
Right. Look at the flow chart here where an exception happens. It just routes to you. It actually goes right back to your desk. So you can just take care of that. I was thinking about going down a rabbit hole with a story, Ashley, based off if you're like the person who throws the spanner in the works and is like, oh, but what about this problem? I don't know if it's appropriate because it may or may not actually apply to this scenario, but I do have a really good rabbit hole story for that one. Maybe we'll bring it up someday. Or you can ask me to say it right now.
Yeah, feel free.
Sure, go ahead.
Just share it. You clearly want to.
I kind of do. So
you don't need to ask permission. You can just talk.
This was a few years ago on a project, and the requirement that was given to me was, okay, I was building like an integration process for documents of different types. And I was told, okay, there's this type, and all of the ones of this type behave like this, and all of the ones of this type behave like that. Okay, so I build that as the process, and then I run a test, and I go back to the user and I say, all right, I've built the process, and all of these do this, and all of those do that. And she says, oh, but no, all of those like that do that, but all of those with this other parameter do this other thing.
Naturally.
Of course.
Okay, thanks. That would have been good information to know before, but fine, no problem. Adjust the process, run it again. Oh yeah, except for all of the ones like this. I went through this circle at least 7 or 8 times, getting literally one requirement at a time, one unique use case at a time, until finally at the end, I had like all 9 different permutations mapped out.
Did you ever ask her, like, are there any others?
Yeah, I asked her that at like number 3, and she was like, nope, this is it. They all
was
work
it,
like
do you
this.
think it was intentional, or was she just wasn't thinking through it enough?
I don't know. It could have been intentional. Maybe she just liked to see me sweat. I'm not sure.
But I'll say that's really good pointers for the end users. You know, like I always think of that being an end user. It's like, when we've talked about this, like focus on the outcome rather than how you're going to do things, but also make sure that you're including all the right people in the room to make sure that your project is going to be as successful. Because one person might not know everything and can't represent all people.
Or they don't have all the perceptions of like, or perspectives, I should say, of all the different potential end users of the system. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think like sometimes the end users don't think something is relevant, but it is. So like I always like say overshare, like share more about the process or more about your business and you think we need to know. And we'll decide like if it's not useful, it's just context and we can not incorporate it. But like having more is better than like not enough, because you don't think it's relevant. Like you don't, I guess I don't assume it's not relevant. Like just share it if you're thinking it, or it has something to do with what's being discussed.
I'm a complete oversharer. I think my partners get sick of I'm just going to tell you everything. And then when you've had enough, tell me to stop talking, because I'm just going to tell you as much as I think you need to know. And
you're going to cover your bases that way.
Mm-hmm.
See, and I think that's actually a great segue back to the right sizing topic, I think, which is if you get more information and more context, now you can make a plan for scalability, for future expansion, right? Like you can decide like, okay, today we're going to hit this 80% because that's, the volume that we need to solve for. But because Ashley has also overshared all of these other details, like I know that we might need to expand it this way in the future, or we might have enough volume in this other area that we have to take care of that someday. And because you've shared that information, now that context can feed back into making sure that the solution is designed in a way that it's easy to expand, instead of being like, oh, we kind of painted ourselves into a corner here. We kind of have to throw most of this out in order to do this other thing that now you want to do.
Because maybe you didn't know
later.
that, like
Right.
what the future plans were.
Right. Or you didn't realize that the technology was going to back you into that corner if you used that design. It's good advice, Ashley. Always overshare. For the end users out there, overshare, please, with your partner.
I will say, though, that is the only time in my life I do overshare. Clearly, since you guys didn't know it was my birthday.
But we found out. I Facebook stalked you. I was like, I know it's in April and it's almost the end of April, so it has to be soon.
That's awesome. One of the other points about right sizing is thinking about licensing. I feel like maybe Liz, you had added that.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any thoughts around?
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of times where like people just assume they need like the full enterprise, like they just default to the full. And so like my advice would be just think about it. Think about even if you need dynamics, like maybe a model driven app and Dataverse is fine, depending on what the use case is. So like don't just assume someone needs that top tier kind of enterprise dynamics license. Like they might not, or just one app might do the trick. So just be like conscious of that.
And I'll say, I agree with you, right? Also, don't forget there's a team license, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you need people to do just a very specific thing, think about all the licensing options that are out there for you, especially people who are just going to view data versus like actually interact with it. But the Power Apps one is huge, right? The biggest difference right now is I think the goals are only going to be available in enterprise. So they're actually moving goals into Power BI. That was announced at Invest. Yeah. So it's actually kind of cool where, you think, oh my gosh, like now everybody has to move to enterprise to use goals, but Microsoft has this vision to move it elsewhere. So making sure that you're staying up on the technology and like what the licensing options are can really change the direction of where you go in the future.
And licensing changes frequently, and it's not hard to find the most current licensing guide. Like just Google it, find the most recent, and just use that as a point of reference instead of like assuming, last time you looked it up, if it was a year ago, things might have changed.
Last time you looked it up was a year ago. Things have almost certainly changed. And that's actually a super great example. Like this is how I sort of discovered, looking through the licensing guide and looking through the list of restricted tables, that you can actually deploy all of your sales functionality, leads and opportunities, and even quotes and invoices and all that other stuff with just the Power Apps license. Like none of those tables are restricted. You don't actually need a sales license at all, unless you either want to use goals or you want to use any of the sales insights features. And as we've talked about on the podcast before, there are a lot of cool sales insights features. But if all you need to do is like, I just need to track leads and opportunities, and I've only got 2 sales guys and I don't need the system to tell them what to do, like that might be sufficient. You can totally get by with just a Power Apps license.
Save a lot of money on licensing.
You sure can. Yep. What else does anyone want to add about how to right size? Liz, do you have other thoughts? Ashley, any other thoughts? Either of you?
Well, I want to bring up environments again because I see that done poorly and well, depending on the project. And I know we briefly talked about it in our previous podcast too, but just thinking about the complexity of your deployment in Merlin. I know you shared that example where it was really multiple projects kind of happening in tandem, but not doing a one size fits all approach and tailoring the deployment plan and the environment plan to meet the needs of the client.
Yeah, it's true. And I know in the last one you said that you should always have a sandbox in a production, but I did actually find a situation recently where I'm just developing in production because it's a startup and they're not using it for anything yet.
A lot of small clients
So
just use production, and I've definitely done work just in a production environment as well. Like if it's super small, and they just don't. They're like, we can't maintain, like they don't have anyone internally to like use both properly. And so like I'll educate them, but at some point, yeah, you're like, if you're that small or you're a startup, like fine. The risk is low, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that that's where you involve like other people in your company, like IT on security stuff, right? Because there's just something you can really mess up a production. I've done that before. I'm like, oh, I can just throw this back in, the day where you didn't know any better and just put something right into production, and it like completely messes everything up. So I definitely think that having a sandbox is necessary.
How do you guys feel about having separate environments for like QA and UAT and training, like having a separate one for each one of those purposes versus just one kind of lower environment that you use for all of it?
It was also just for my experience, most of the places that I've worked at, we've had one sandbox and one production. And that was because either I was the only person making the changes or I had, one partner, but we knew what each other were doing. Mm-hmm. The current environment that I'm in, and that worked. I could do some training in sandbox if I needed to. I refreshed it, quite frequently, because everything back then was unmanaged, so it didn't matter. That has changed now. I know Microsoft has always had rules about it, but they're just more strict. I don't want to say strict about it, but it's just more feasible for you now to use managed solutions. So now we have 6 environments total, 3 dev environments, because we have 2 vendors and then me. So we all develop separately. And then we bring that all into a dev master to make sure that our code's not overriding, each other. And then we have a UAT, which is an exact replica of our production. So it's managed, it works, and so that way we can make sure that it all works seamlessly. I don't have a separate training environment. I have seen that before. I dislike training environments because it's really hard to make sure that it's exactly like your production, or it's just another environment.
It's a lot of overhead because you want it to be identical to production, ideally. Yep. And then like storage wise too, like if you're copying all that data, like, yeah, something to think about.
Yeah. So I just use our UAT for a lot of tests or for a lot of training or, demoing, like, hey, this new feature is coming. So I use our sandbox or UAT because that already is, I would say, exactly like our production, but it has less data. So it works.
So I'm going to ask like a question related to deploying features or solutions. Have you guys ever seen on a project where you don't actually use solutions to promote changes and you just copy a lower environment to, let's say, prod? Have you guys ever done that as an approach?
I've only ever seen that on like a go live.
Interesting.
Never seen it
like after go live.
No, because the data is.
Yeah, but you can do a minimal copy instead of a full copy.
Yeah, so even when you do a minimal copy, though, it wipes out the data, doesn't it?
No. At least it didn't used to.
Yeah, I think it does. Either it does now because I definitely did a minimal copy and it got rid of all the data. But also some of your customizations downwards. I did the minimal copy, not up to production. Gosh, that would be terrifying. But it also didn't carry over all like plugins in JavaScript. Like there were some things that did not work with just a minimal copy. So I don't know if that's changed. But I heavily avoid them now because I just know that there's stuff in my system that will not work if I use it.
And it's been a few years since I've been on a project, but yeah, we never moved a solution and it was just a copy to promote changes.
That seems like a lot of risk to move even very small changes, right? Like, oh, I just need to make a few field changes. I'm just going to overwrite the entire environment like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It seems risky to me.
And it was supposed to go live.
Even better.
Mhm.
It sounds super exciting. I don't think I would recommend that as an approach, but
I was just curious. It's the only time I've seen it done. And I'm like, I wonder if this is
But
normal.
I could see it going live, right? Implementation.
Yeah.
Totally
Sure.
makes sense.
Pre-go live, because the risk factor is so different. But no, like on a system that's already in use, I think that's different for sure.
yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else thinking about right sizing. I think we haven't really talked about like the roles of people either internally or with a partner, and like how many people make sense. So I think the last thing that I was going to mention is thinking about like team roles. And I think over time, as the Power Platform has expanded, it's become a little bit more difficult to like be a generalist who can do everything. And so some level of specialization is kind of necessary. But on the flip side of that, if you get sort of too far down the specialist track and everybody on the team has to be too specialized, then like one of the things we were talking about in our last episode was like how it's difficult to relay context if somebody's not in the room, like with the requirements gathering. And so now you end up in this situation where, well, I got to have like 8 people in the room because everybody's a specialist. And I think that's like when you're thinking about the kind of solution that you need and trying to fit it to the right size for your organization, if you can cut out some of the need for that specialization, like, you know, maybe you add that on as a future phase, like, well, we don't need the chatbot today, so we'll leave like the chatbot guy out of the meeting for now and save that cost and then bring him in later when we actually need to talk about the chatbots for like phase 2.
Yeah. So about like project team size, do you feel like there's ever a situation where like a 1-person project team is acceptable?
Sure.
Like a combo role?
I'm a 1-person.
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of the project.
And how do you feel
Sorry,
about,
Rowan.
yeah, like, okay, so let's say you're on a medium size, like, how do you feel about like the combo PM, BA, like where there's not a distinctive PM and it's someone like playing that part-time role? Like, how do you guys feel about that?
I think unless there's more than 2 people that they would be PMing, I think it's difficult sometimes to have a PM. That is my personal opinion, because then you have this PM joining your calls and your meetings and you don't really know what they're doing. So I think that having a PM in a place, I could see obviously with a developer, if you're only working with a developer, but like in that BA role, if they're the only resource and they have the time capacity to take it on, I think it could make sense in that scenario.
My challenge with that is it's very difficult to work on like the work in a project and then also manage to step back and think about it from the high level like budget and timeline perspective. Like it's very difficult to do that context switching
When you
So
have
I
to like
think-
hold yourself accountable, like as a person
Right.
building it, like you might want to
Yeah.
do like what's more fun from a build, but like, are you doing the right thing from the scope, budget, timeline? Like you kind of have to like be bipolar and like switch like hats and be like, okay, now I'm caring
Yeah.
about it from a PM perspective versus a functional or a BA perspective.
But I also think looking at it from the end user perspective, I do a lot of the projects myself, right? Like we have a need, I PM myself, I build it myself, I'm the functional person, I'm the trainer. I mean, so what you're talking about, I would say is specifically to the consultant or partner world, because a lot
Yeah.
of in-house people do all of those roles and they are able to do it. So that's why I think even in the consultant world, it could be possible because end users do it all the time.
But I think the
That's true.
expectations of the consultant team is different. Like, actually, we've talked about how you don't track your time. Like, I don't think a consulting team could just not do a status report or a status update or ever like document time or budget and like have the customer be okay with that. Like, I think
But
a
I
more formal
track it in
PM role
different
is
ways.
needed.
Like I don't track my hours, I don't track the budget, but I mean, I have to keep a Jira board updated. I have to get the right people in the room. I have to communicate like to leaders what the progress is. I mean, so it's everything except for just tracking time.
Yeah, I guess that's reasonable. I mean, the approach that sort of we're using at the moment is 1 PM across many, many projects.
Yeah, like
Right.
a
And so-
fractional.
Right. So essentially he's just checking in with the people who are doing the work and saying, how's it going? And then it sort of comes down to, because that PM isn't present through the project itself, you have to have a good relationship then between the PM and the dev or the consultant, so that the consultant can be like, yeah, I'm kind of behind schedule on this, and like
They have to kind of be like
there.
Offer up information. The PM's not
Right.
just like, they could say everything's good and the PM wouldn't know otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So like, does
so they have to be honest.
Does a fractional PM that's spread out across that many projects really add that much value? And maybe Ashley, that's your point.
Honestly, I haven't worked in that much. I will say, with experience with consultants, all the PMs have always sat on every call. So I've never had, and all they were doing is tracking time budget. And I found that to be odd, because why is a PM sitting in on a technical conversation?
Yeah, I guess I appreciate our fractional PM model, just because it gives me an external person to check in and be like, okay, last week you said you were going to get this done. Did you get it done? Like, we're going to go to the customer on our status meeting tomorrow. So did you get it done? Or are you going to get it done by tomorrow? And I can be like, yes, I know. I'm sorry. I should have gotten it done. I'll get it done. I'll do it right now. I guess I feel like I benefit from having that external person just like checking in on me on a regular basis, because otherwise, like, maybe I forget, maybe I get bogged down in a different project. I'm like, oh, I forgot to do that thing. Oh, that's coming up. Oh, I did promise that. Like, it's good to have that sort of external person just being like, everything cool? Like, everything's cool. Thanks for checking in. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
So similar question, and let's say a one-person project, like, do you think it's fine if one person makes all the design decisions, or do you think there needs to be like a fractional architect equivalent, like some sort of QA check or like oversight or feedback before just deploying maybe something completely on your own? Have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, I have such mixed, like, I could, like, in the beginning, I was like, no, it needs to be multiple. Then the more you went, I was like, I do that all the time. I just like, hey, you guys need this, and then just roll it out and tell them it's there and hope they use it. So I would say it depends on what it is, which is such a cop-out answer. But so if anybody asks for anything, I involve them in that entire process. So if I have a salesperson says, hey, I need this functionality, or a sales manager says, my team needs to be able to do this, and then I say, well, you are now a part of this entire process. I'm not just going to go away, do stuff, and then come back to you in production. I make them fully a part of that process to help make decisions and things like that. In like a consultant world, I try everything I can to not let my partners talk to my end users, and not because I don't want them to, but because my end users, like, their time is so valuable. So if we're going to take their time to be a part of this, then we have to make sure that like it's necessary, or it's, also I can represent the end users because I hear their pain, I feel their pain. So I think that it's hard to answer that. I'm going to say it's hard to answer that question.
I feel like this is a trick question. I'm thinking back to like your design, like best practices presentation, Liz, about like, you should always run your design past somebody else. And I think in general, that's a good idea. In practice, I think you have to rely a certain amount on the expertise of the individual. So Ashley has a decade plus of experience in dynamics. I can trust her to, like, if she comes up with a design, it's probably fine. I don't think she needs any babysitting.
Or I ran it past you guys, and you guys also said it was good. So that happens a lot too.
That is running it past someone. It's just not, part of your organization.
Right. Right. But I think like somebody who's maybe more junior, who hasn't like had that much experience on the product yet, or hasn't done a project in that industry before, or hasn't done like that module as much before, like, then it's probably more important to have somebody else like drop in periodically and just be like, all right, like, tell me about how you designed this. That sounds good. Or maybe tweak it this way or that way. But I think it comes down to seniority and expertise.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Any other parting thoughts? I'll ask Ashley first.
I don't think so. I would say just on the end user side, don't be afraid to own the project internally if you have somebody that can do that. I think that that's a great way to keep it on track and also make sure that you're meeting your needs, which I know both of you are like, no, as consultants, we should own it. But there should be like, I think that the end user should 100% own the project, and you should also have a PM on your side, whether that's the same person making the decisions. I think that solely relying on a partner to right size the project or to PM the project or make sure it's on budget time, whatever, I think that you should have somebody on your side doing that as well.
I agree with
work,
you.
extra
It goes
work,
a
but
lot better if the end user owns it too. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, Liz, any other parting thoughts?
Not right now. Do you have
All
any other thoughts, Merlin?
No, I think I'm all right for today. It was a great discussion, though. Thanks, guys. Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.